Welcome to Australian Hunger. I am your host, Ben, and on today's show I've been interviewed with Doug from Hemina, a Sydney progressive metal band. But before I get to that, sincere apologies to Doug from Hemina and to Arbranth, who I'll be playing an interview with next week, because I actually recorded this interview, I don't know, it might have been 2 months ago, whenever everything sort of swung into action with coronavirus. And, you know, I sort of lost, I don't know, the sort of drive, ability, motivation, however you want to phrase it, to really kind of move forward with the interviews, edit them, put them out as podcasts. At the beginning of the sort of quarantine, social distancing, there was certainly a lot of people talking about, you know, it's such a great opportunity. There were people like Isaac Newton, William Shakespeare, John Milton, who made incredible accomplishments during their various quarantines from plagues. But it's kind of not exactly like that. The feeling, you know, you can say like you've got more time, but there are so many different other aspects to it. There is a feeling of bizarreness, of otherworldliness when you're in quarantine. And that makes it kind of very difficult to be motivated for these kind of projects, for these kind of hobbies. It's not just enough to say, well, you've got extra time, you should be even more productive. Unfortunately, it certainly hasn't worked like that. But hopefully, you know, I've been feeling a little bit more motivated. I'm trying to be getting myself motivated, and it seems to have happened. So let's hope it's all steam ahead. And let's hope that, you know, I'm wishing everyone well who has been affected by coronavirus, wishing everyone well who is, you know, in some sense, you know, suffering the effects of social distancing. But it's unfortunately a very necessary approach to get through this, and let's hope that, you know, we'll, through our efforts, and hopefully it's a little bit more questionable about some of the other countries, but through the world's efforts, we might be able to get through this and approach something like normality, and we might be able to sort of approach a normal life and get back to some of the better things that we've been missing out on. But enough of that. So I was fortunate enough to talk to Doug from Hemina. They released their last album, Night Echoes, last year. And they were looking to do a festival, which unfortunately fell through, but I think we may as well do the interview anyway. Their album, Night Echoes, obviously, like any bands that I've interviewed, and like any bands, you know, that, you know, obviously suffering because of lack of income, lack of exposure, I encourage you to go to their Bandcamp and check them out and buy their records. And the songs that I played during the interview were What's the Catch and We Will. This is Doug from Hemina. Douglas Skene is a vocalist and guitarist for Sydney progressive metal band Hemina, whose album Night Echoes was released last year. Doug, thank you so much for chatting to me.
Hey man, it's great to be here. Good to have another chat. It's been a little while since the album came out.
Yeah. So I don't know if we'll get into the reason why we're chatting, despite the fact
that... well.
Yeah. So maybe we might chat a little bit about that later. But I first want to start off with some general stuff about the band, then talk a little bit about the album.
Yeah, that's cool, man.
Just a general question, like how did the band start?
Oh, I think Hemina started between me and a friend I had at uni back in the day. We were pretty much big metal fans and into a lot of progressive rock and that kind of thing, and we just wanted to make something that sounded very different to what other bands were doing in Australia in particular. I was playing in another band, Anubis, which I'm still in that band nowadays, and I was looking for something with a bit more of a metal avenue as well, to do like big conceptual kind of music with a lot of keyboards, but maybe like a more of a metal angle than what Anubis was doing at the time. So eventually started meeting friends who were looking for bands at the time, and the lineup's changed quite a bit since back in the day, but that was the main driver, making some original progressive sort of metal sounds.
And where did the name come from?
I was trying to come up with something that sounded a bit mystical and a bit like heavenly, so I was just looking through lots of different languages, ways of saying like heaven or ethereal and all those kind of things. And apparently it's a Proto-Germanic word for heaven. Even if that's not true, it's kind of stuck now. And it had a pretty good search engine optimization as well. So there's not a lot of other things that you find when you search it up. So if anyone's ever heard of us and they know the spelling, they'll be able to find us from that pretty easily.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I was struggling to find out, you know, I like to, even though, you know, I'm asking the question, I kind of like to have an idea if maybe that's going to inform the question I'm going to ask. And the only thing I could find out is apparently in Latin that was used by the Romans for some kind of measurement.
Yeah, it's apparently some like two pints. I think it is. It's like just under a liter. I think a wine measurement. That's you can buy Heminas of wine apparently.
Yeah, I was interested if there was some other meaning.
There's no piss-head alcoholic take on the name, man. It's just a pure coincidence.
I mean, that's bold to name yourself after a unit of measurement.
Yeah, well, long neck didn't sound right, so.
Let's talk about a little bit about the album. It's interesting because this was you talk about albums and like what does it mean to like make another album? Like you release an album, it has a certain sound. Release another album, it has a certain sound. It differs and is similar to the one that precedes it. With this album, what were you kind of aiming for? What were your thoughts about like this is the kind of music I want to make this time around?
Well, there's been a few changes, as you said. Like you can always hear like the thread of the band throughout all the rest of the albums, but we've made a decent sort of a change each album that's come along. Like the first album we did, Synthetic, was like very, very proggy, not a lot of repeating sections, very long. We tried to go a bit more catchy on the second album, Nebulae, and then I guess the third album was definitely the strongest thing we'd done at the time, Venus, which had a lot of, it was very long, had a lot of groovy, djenty elements to it. I think I was getting a little bit sick of the djenty sound that every band was doing where it sounded like Meshuggah ripoffs. Even though we didn't really lean so heavily into that sound before, I just kind of got a bit sick of that sound and wanted to aim for something maybe a bit more on the rock sort of spectrum. It was trying to aim really to make it a very emotional sounding album. Because I didn't have any real aspirations to make it some big tough sounding thing. I think the last two albums kind of have certain fans that prefer one album over the other, which is cool. I mean, it's better than everyone just thinking one album's a good one and everyone thinking one album unanimously is a bad one. So it's really that emotional angle and trying also to fit something onto a single vinyl length. That was something definitely I was thinking about, going back to that classic length of an album, because probably the biggest criticism we had in the past is that our stuff was too long. So we tried to be a bit cutthroat with that this time.
I was going to ask this question a little bit later, but like in terms of aiming for a vinyl, writing for a vinyl, like talk a little bit, how do you kind of approach that?
Well, a lot of times back in the past, I've just thought about it being a long journey across 75 or 80 minutes, and I've thought of it, I guess, like a film across the whole album. And this time it's just a condensed version of that. Really, you have to be able to break the journey into two parts. Most commonly, it's easy to find the beginning and the end song of an album. So definitely with this album, Flicker was always known. I knew that would be the last track, especially because of the way the vocal outro was there. And then The Only Way always was going to be the opening track. So it's kind of then filling in the gaps between those spots and finding like a nice dynamic kind of exit off the first side of the album and a nice intro back into the second half. And just seemed to naturally, the songs we had written fit into that groove. And it was a good challenge as well. Sometimes you got to challenge yourself with an album to do things different to how you did in the past. And that 45-ish minute limitation was good to give it a bit of focus, I thought.
Just getting back to like the general kind of sound of the album, it was kind of, I'll mention this a little bit later, but as well, but like I don't have very good musical vocabulary, but it kind of had a, like you said, a rocky feel, this kind of very lead in terms of vocals and guitars. I felt there was a lot of that, especially kind of, there was some like really, intense kind of flourishes in the vocals. Like you're really sort of going for it in like a song like The Only Way. Talk a little bit about that aspect of the album.
I think the vocals have been a pretty big focus for us, especially when it comes to all the harmonization we've done. I think the vocal flourishes come from not really listening just to metal and listening to other genres. Like I like a lot of pop and R&B stuff as well. And so there's something I find if you try and take inspiration from the genre outside of metal and bring it in, you might have a bit more of a different sound there. Just channeling lots of different influences together. Some like the gospel-y sort of vocals and that kind of stuff. I think that you can hear that in The Only Way. Someone to push it so, there was something unique about the delivery on the solos and also, especially the vocals. I think we had the most varied vocals in this album.
Yeah, absolutely. Just in terms of the length of songs, like specifically trying to write a shorter album, I think there is So there are 3 longer songs on just Venus than on this entire album. Is it like a yeah? And within Technicolor, it's only about 20 seconds shorter than the 4th longest song on Venus. Is it specifically trying to approach songwriting in a different way to sort of bring that down a bit, those lengths? What was it that sort of enabled you to sort of deliver this particular sort of length of the album?
Sometimes I think it's fun to play shorter length songs live as well, and just it is a different challenge trying to get it condensed and impactful within like that 3.5 to 5 minute kind of length. It's just a good personal challenge, just so you don't feel like you're repeating it again, because each one of these albums we all work full time. This is music we do on the side, and if you're dedicating like a year to 2 years of your life split out across that working on an album, it's hard to then take that exact long period of time and make a very, very similar album to the one beforehand. You feel like you're just retreading the same steps, and it would be very, very hard to stay committed the whole time. So I think this complete challenge to do the shorter length songs was good for us, and it just felt like a fresh way of doing it. That's not to say that in the future there won't be a lot of long songs. I think that the long songs actually are something we usually do pretty well. So it wasn't like we were turning our back on these longer, more epic tracks. I think you'll see, at least on what we're currently working on now, there should be an EP coming out this year, and it's going to be two longer songs and maybe like a 6.5-ish minute song. So there's definitely some epic stuff to come. It's just something different for that period in time.
Yeah, a 6-minute song, a short song.
Yeah.
I read an interview, I think it was back when you first released the first album, and I think you mentioned that you were using software to notate everything first before you sort of proceeded sort of further into approaching those songs. How is your writing sort of changed or similar to how you first started with the band?
Definitely there's still a lot of that notation being done first. Like we still use Guitar Pro. Probably we're still using the same version of it that we would have been using back when the band first started in like 2010. It's a pretty old piece of software now, but I feel like that's a good way of taking the production element out of the song and actually making sure that notes you're picking themselves are working quite well. And it also helps for the rest of the band learning the songs, because they're pretty elaborate arrangements. You don't just necessarily come with it on the fly as you're improvising together. You need to take some time and plan the songs out. So we definitely still do that. I would say when it comes to like writing out solos and definitely in terms of notating the drums, that doesn't happen in the same way anymore. I try to leave the drums unwritten so that Nathan can actually fill it in as much as he wants, because we had written a lot of drums on Venus, and it was always this thing of feeling challenged when you hear what Nathan would come up with. Like, it'd be really good what he came up with, but you're used to hearing things a certain way. So I didn't want to limit his writing and his ownership of the music by writing all the drums out for him. But there's still a lot of notation. Just I don't think we notate really the solos or the drums anymore. But Nathan has his own kind of writing procedure. He'll program drums just to make sure it works with the track, and we'll keep workshopping that back and forth. And when we're happy with it, then we'll eventually go in and record the drums for the tracks. So it has changed a bit. I think even moving forward now, there'll be less notation and more just like writing songs straight away into the DAWs. Like we all have recording setups, but in the past, I think more like Mitch is one of the big writers as well in the band. He'd done a lot of his writing just on the notation. It's always been recorded at my place, as getting the demos together, where I think that might change a little bit more in the future.
So this goes back to me having a very limited musical vocabulary. So I've had some spare time recently, and I've tried actually learning music theory, and like I understand some of the concepts, but I don't really properly grasp yet how the music theory translates to like writing good music. Like so, watching you and reading your interviews, and you talked a little bit about your musical concepts like time signature. You use a Mixolydian mode in We Will. You use different keys in flat.
Yeah,
I'm wondering like how explicitly you think about music theory, those kind of concepts when you make your songs.
Most of the time, I would say it's descriptive, and it's not a prescriptive approach. So you're not going into something with the musical theory in mind, but you can use it to describe what you come up with afterwards. Like a lot of stuff, you're going to do it based on intuition and instinct for a certain musical sound, and it's just based upon what your brain wants to hear from listening to like tens of thousands of hours of music over your lifetime, right? So that's the same with me. I have taken a lot of time to learn theory because I just find it interesting. I like that scientific approach of getting into the nuts and bolts of things and really understanding it. But I rarely am thinking of music theory as I'm writing something. It's nearly always by ear, and I'm trying to then like tape down what I'm hearing in my head. I would probably use it sometimes when I'm writing like chords and figuring out certain chord voicings, how to go between two, or when I'm writing vocal harmonies, the theory can make things a little bit quicker then. But a lot of the other stuff is just really instinctual.
I want to chat about a couple of songs. Some of the parts that stood out to me, just out of interest, not not saying anything particular about the songs, but like the start of One Shot, that was a very kind of, I don't know, like a little short bit of kind of interest. Talk a little bit about that section of that song.
I think this was also one of those attempts to do something a little bit different where you almost feel like you're hearing a section of music in a space. So it was like a little short musical idea where I almost had like that choir vocal part starting beforehand. And originally I didn't have it planned to be like where it was like for people that don't know what you're talking about, it's kind of like you're hearing a little gospel session, like the beginning of a choir warming up. It's almost like it's in the middle of like a church session like that before the track jumps in. So we took that musical idea and then we put all of it together in like one reverb space, so it almost sounds like you're in the room listening to that part. So that was something that just emerged as we started recording. It wasn't necessarily intended like that. And luckily the guys let me kind of do that silly kind of intro. Like I think it's pretty cool. It's something a bit different. But it's just one of those spur of the moment kind of things that emerged as you're starting to build the tracks up.
You've called Flat out as one of, I think, your favourite tracks on the album, as well as in Technicolor. But for Flat, it strikes me it has a very different rhythmic feel to a lot of the rest of the album.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that and how that emerged.
Well, I guess just purely by the fact that it's one of the more acoustic-y songs where the heavy guitars are not throughout the whole track, it allows itself to be interpreted rhythmically quite differently. I mean, you have Everything Unsaid, which is an acoustic track, but that's really like an unaccompanied sort of a song. It's just acoustic guitar and vocals. Flat had orchestral layers and a lot of acoustic guitars and a very, very soft vocal delivery for a lot of it. It would be hard to have that same really like percussive, syncopated rhythm going throughout it. And in the middle section of the song, even when it does get heavy, is like very, I would say, like almost like a doomy kind of sound there that's not really hurting much about the stuff. It's just like when we were writing it, we didn't want it to sound like any of our other previous songs, man. So that's just how it came out. And any specific drum ideas, I guess that's down to Nate's interpretation of the song. His drums he wrote for are actually very different to what I would have imagined in my head beforehand, but that's kind of the great thing about collaboration and when you're working with people that you really like their music ability.
Now, like, for like you guys as a musical outfit, very versatile in that, you know, you've got two guitarists, drummer, bassist, but you also, my understanding is, do the keyboards. But most of you guys can sing, and so you've got lots of different stuff going on throughout the entire record. But you also have a few other vocalists and musicians on the album. When do you see that you're like, maybe we need someone else as well?
One of the things we have had on a lot of the records before is like we have a lot of these choir layers that just aren't us singing, or maybe like we'd get a guest vocalist in to just like thicken up some of the layers. There's sometimes where I really just want it to be like one of the four of us being heard and really distinctly hearing those different voices. And there's other times where you want it to be more like a crowd is singing it. And I figured it'd be a nice way to involve some of the fans so they feel a bit more autonomy towards the music as well. So we just put the feelers out, see if there's any people interested. There's about, I guess, 10 or so people that ended up sending us files. Quite a few more people that were interested in that, but just didn't get around to sending us the stuff in time. So I thought it was just cool. There's a lot of bits where you need that extra lift of like a big screaming, shouty thing, and had the desired effect. Even if some of the guys that send through stuff aren't like the finest singers by themselves, when you blend all the voices together, it gives you that live crowd kind of experience.
Just in terms of like the lyrics of the album, like all your albums fit into this kind of conceptual, hymenal universe.
Yeah.
But like they don't sort of. It's not like you're telling a narrative that's like, all right, this is part 1, this is part 2, this is part 3, part 4. Where it's like it's all building up to the final conclusion. All of them have like a key part in a specific narrative. They kind of like sort of stand as, within themselves, even though they're connected. Why did you develop that? I find that a really fascinating concept.
I think it's as much for me as it is for any other listener, and it gives me some sort of guidance in my head. And yeah, you're right. A lot of it is, I guess, open to interpretation. That's why I've tried to give at least some background with each of the albums to kind of see where I'm coming at with it, and then people can sew it together a little bit in their head. I do see the next EP we're going to be releasing is going to be like the final cap on the story, but it's just. I guess I found it interesting to do it through some sort of conceptual story. It gave me a focus for every album, and I guess the best way of looking at it is like you can look at the story being about, a mother, a father, and a child, and how they would experience the world. And they are loosely connected to each other in the story. There's some small like lyrical links between it, but you're right. It's not like an Aerion album where it's people having dialogue between each other. It's not so explicit like that. And I didn't really ever want it to be like that. So I mean, some people might think it's the concepts are too obscure or it's too open ended, but I felt like that's what gives me the most enjoyment out of it.
General facts about the album. Why did you choose the title?
It was a title suggested by Nathan. He was reading through the lyrics, listening to the songs, and I said, "Can you, like everyone else in the band?" Because I was the one who wrote a lot of the lyrics. I'm like, I don't want to come up with a title. I want to put it out to you guys. Just kind of keep circulating things, and what's a phrase that sticks out to you. And that one seemed to stick out. Everyone seemed to like it. I think kind of fit in with the synthwavy aesthetic of stuff we were listening to at the time. And it did kind of make a lot of sense to me, like the idea of night echoes. One of the themes I kind of have throughout the lyrics is the idea of like replaying history, kind of copying the events of the past. So the Sun, which this album is mainly like centered around him replaying a lot of memories and traumas of the past, but also kind of reliving his life in similar ways to how his dad had lived. So it kind of seemed like it was this like weird muted sort of echo of the previous story. I mean, that's an association that came to me afterwards. It wasn't the driver behind the name, but I thought it was a cool sort of a connection.
Who did the cover and what was their brief for it?
So I think we had worked with a guy, Tristan Tate, before, who's like a very, very talented artist, and he did the other albums covers before. And I think the guys just wanted something a little bit different, especially because we were, trying to go for the slightly shorter songs and that kind of thing, and it kind of leaning into it in a more of a heavy way to do something different to what Venus was. They thought it'd just be nice to have a fresh cover art, and I agreed. I think it was cool. It was like a mutual decision to go for that. So we started looking all over the net for like people that were doing this 80s sort of concept art. The cost of getting people to do an original artwork like that really, really ranged a lot. Like it would go from someone charging you a few $100s to tens of thousands of dollars for something. So it all depended on the work they had previously done. If they'd happened to done work for some movie or whatever, they're obviously going to have a very high hourly rate to work on stuff. This guy seemed to be newly getting into it, Dominique, and I just reached out to him, and he seemed quite affordable for what he was going to deliver. And we just said we wanted to be not focusing on a person. Like all of our other album covers had like a human figure somewhere on them. We didn't want to have that. We wanted to be a bit more, I guess, cityscape-like. So he did about 5 or 6 different cityscapes, and we kind of said, this is the one where we're liking the direction the most, and then he elaborated on it from there.
Simple, light through the teeth.
What's the catch?
The catch is anything that's worth the damn at all is worth fighting new and we'll embed with our lives. Whether wrong or right, only you are right. You cross the distance, formed by space and time. Don't know if I am ready to let myself fall this fast without a lifeline. But now I'm as sure as I have been before. The gamble's worth the game. But if all was fair, we wouldn't have to spin through and we'll embed with our lives. Whether wrong or right, only you are right. You cross the distance, formed by space and time. Are you waiting? 'Cause I'm waiting. Are you really there? If you're who you say you are, there's no sense hiding there.
This is a section of my notes where I usually talk about the live show, if there is such a live show, but I guess there isn't. So, I figured we may as well talk about like the, I don't know, the elephant in the room. So like coronavirus is going to be affecting a lot of social interaction, and gigs are one of those forms of social interaction. And even if maybe like they don't go banning small things than 500 people, there's possibility that either the venues themselves or some other regulation may inhibit the ability of bands to play shows. I don't know, like as someone who is specifically affected by that, I'm just sort of wondering about your thoughts, like what are the feelings of other people in the industry, if you have any, like that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I think you make a very good point that a lot of social interactions will be affected. I'm starting to feel it in my own life from work, forcing us to work from home. This Prog Aid concert that was meant to be there, which I thought had a lot of great bands playing it, unfortunately it hasn't gone ahead. I think potentially, even if it was going to go ahead, it might have got a late cancellation due to all this coronavirus outbreak anyhow. There's one other show we have next month, and I'm just wondering even if that's still going to go ahead. It would be only quite a small gathering, I would imagine 100 or less, but it seems that there's generally a trajectory heading towards us not going out at all and kind of keeping very, very protected. I think there's a lot of businesses, especially that are tied to the music industry, that probably survive week to week or at least month to month, and if they get a couple of really bad months in a row, they would be completely fucked, to be honest. So I think that we're going to see that happening quite a bit. And on a personal band experience as well, my other band, Anubis, we're supposed to be playing a tour in Japan in May. I don't know what's going to happen with that now, and we're kind of at the stage now where it looks very improbable for us to be able to do it, just based on the fact that everyone's going to be doing forced 14-day quarantines when they get back. And I mean, for someone working in IT like myself, they can easily work out to be all right. But for some of the guys that are teachers and have to be around young children, that kind of thing, I just don't see how it's going to be possible. So we've seen already massive cancellations like Knotfest in Japan getting cancelled, and like South by Southwest cancelled in the US. Seems like anything of any sizable kind of gathering is going to get cancelled. So I really don't see what the end is in sight. Hopefully it's not too long, but I mean, I think we should be sensible and hold these kind of social interactions to some level until we're able to flatten out that curve.
So I want to talk about some of your other work as well as sort of you personally. So you've mentioned Nubis a couple of times. That's your other band. I had a good pleasure to listen to your new album. Oh damn! I don't have it in my notes. The new album. What's it called? Sorry.
Homeless.
Homeless. That's it. Exactly. So the new album, Homeless, it was released, I think, on the 10th. So it's only just come out. Talk a little bit about Anubis, and as you mentioned, it's sort of been the band you've been involved in even before Hemina. Talk a little bit about how like that sort of differs from Hemina, and then we'll sort of take the album a little bit more from there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I always think about Anubis having a bit of a spirit of like 70s prog bands, but with a bit more of a modern rock touch, because the guys are really big into all those classic bands. Yes, Pink Floyd, Genesis. 4 of the guys played in the Pink Floyd tribute band before, like a really good one, and that was called Shine On, and they did very authentic performances, that kind of stuff. So a lot of the Floyd influences come through into our stuff, but there's also a fondness of the modern bands like Radiohead or Mars Volta and that kind of stuff. So it still has much less of a metal sort of an edge, but there are a lot of commonalities. Like there's a lot of vocal harmonies. There is that conceptual sort of a work there, a lot of keyboard layers and that kind of thing. But I think they are trying to achieve different things, and I feel like both bands tick some musical boxes for me. Like without the two of them, I'd feel a bit incomplete. But it's interesting. Like sometimes the bands seem to be doing similar things in tandem. Like we were also kind of at the point where we wanted to do like a shorter album for that vinyl length, and both bands kind of got to that conclusion independently of each other, but kind of for the same reason that we'd done lots and lots of long albums before, and it was nice to do something as a bit of a change. I've been in the band since 2006, like December 2006. I used to work with a couple of the guys, Rob and Dave, at Pizza Hut, surprisingly, when I was working there at uni, and they had written this concept album about the passing of one of their friends, and they kind of did an imagining like what would have happened to him if we actually found him. He drowned on a holiday somewhere, and I don't think they found his body, so it's kind of like what would have happened to him. You know, they imagined some fantastical land where he was still alive, and had written a prog concept around that. But yeah, the band's been a huge part of my life since I've been 18 through to now, and I'm 31.
This is the 6th album. Talk a little bit about it. Sort of how like when you get up to album 6, like how do you feel about that? Like just that sort of entire kind of length of that band, as you said, you know, basically dominating your really entire adult life.
Yeah, I think that seeing 6 albums is just very impressive that we've been able to stay so dedicated to getting it done, because a lot of people even struggle to get like a couple of albums out there. But we are very passionate about music, and we like religiously meet up pretty much every week for, we've been doing it Tuesday for like 13 years. And I think Dave and Rob, especially the guys who started the band, have always had a crazily good work ethic, and they just love music. So they always inspired me to stay a hard worker. They kind of set, I guess, the blueprint for me and showed me how you can work on an album and get an album finished and do all the mixing of it in-house and that kind of thing. So I always saw that it was possible to make music in a self-produced way and get a good result and start to build fans overseas. So I modeled a lot of that lesson with Hemina as well from the stuff I learnt with Anubis. I still think the first Anubis album I worked on, 230503, was probably one of the most significant albums for me, just from everything I learned from those guys. It was like a crash course in prog, because I was not really a prog rock guy before that. I was more of a Metallica, Pantera, Iron Maiden sort of guy. So there's so much to learn from in that time. I just feel very proud we've got to where we are now, and it is quite a different album to what we've done in the past. Shorter songs, again, just to fit that vinyl format. Anubis had heaps of really long songs before, like 15-minute songs, which we have none of on this album. So, yeah, the response has been pretty good so far, I would say. Just a couple of smaller criticisms, but just for what we expected, they were complaining about not having the long songs and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's funny like that. Like as a band, like especially a prog band, like the kind of expectation is that you'll be doing something different, but like it doesn't quite always work out.
I don't have a problem with that. I even like bands I'm a fan of. I like them to do something challenging, and even if I don't always get it, I like the fact they didn't repeat themselves. So I guess not everyone is the same though. Some people just like to hear the same album from a band they love over and over again with very small differences.
Another thing you do is you run a studio, Plowman Studios, which specialises in the production of prog music. Talk a little bit about working with like a specific kind of music. Like how does that kind of change?
That's my desire to work on that kind of music. A lot of times I've done mixing and like editing and mastering for people that are doing completely different things to prog. Like might be some like electronic music I'm doing, or some hip hop stuff which I've done for people overseas. Like it's quite varied what you end up getting to do. But I do like it when I get to help someone work on like a prog sort of a thing. I've worked on mastering and kind of giving mixed feedback and a lot of suggestions with Sydney band Genetics before. I'm pretty close friends with those guys. So
I'm trying to set up an interview with them right now.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Are they being slackers, or are they...
the bands take their time doing things, I understand.
Okay, I'll have to get the whip out. But no, it is cool to hear different people's interpretation of what progressive music is. And if I get to help out and give any of my expertise or any way I can help with those people, then that feels good to me. I would... In being candid, I would much prefer to be able to do mixing and production work as my main job rather than working in IT, but doesn't necessarily work so easily like that.
So you mentioned that you didn't get into kind of prog music properly until you started playing with Anubis. Talk a little bit about what kind of brought you into it at that time.
I think when I started jamming with the guys, like just after midnight shifts at Pizza Hut, we'd have like acoustic guitars around, and they'd be showing me like the initial Anubis ideas. It was like very intriguing to me, but I didn't quite get all the stuff that was going on, especially like all the time signature stuff. It just was breaking my brain. I mean, I'd learn about it in school music classes and that kind of thing, but I just didn't get it as an application. So they were very keen, as most people are, to kind of share music they loved with me. And a lot of it, at first, I remember listening to like Close to the Edge by Yes, and absolutely like could not stand it. I thought it was just awful. I didn't have much of a tolerance to any dissonance in music or any like clashing kind of sounds. So it took a while for me to get over that. I always enjoyed Pink Floyd because it was kind of more of a classic rock thing. I loved the guitar solos, so that was a bit of a gateway for me. I just think over time and playing with those guys and wanting to, contribute to the music they were doing, it made me naturally have a bit more of a love towards prog. As I started to listen to it more, I kind of appreciated it. But there's definitely down to them getting me into it.
In terms of your actual sort of playing, like when did you start playing guitar and why did you stick with it?
Started playing guitar in 2001, and I initially started playing just pop punk music. That was my thing I loved. I loved all the big bands that were around at the time, like the Blink-182s, Green Day, Offspring, all that kind of stuff. And I started hearing like Metallica and just kind of getting blown away because I hadn't really been a metal guy. I did listen to Limp Bizkit and Linkin Park, but I never really quite connected that to the guitar. It wasn't as riffy as like when you first hear Metallica. And I was attracted to hearing like this skilled sort of a music that had a real like oomph and heaviness to it. It's just somehow grabbed me as a 14-year-old kid, and I felt a sense of purpose from playing more. I liked feeling that I could achieve something that not necessarily everyone could do. It just gave me a good outlet for expression throughout my teenage years when I was quite a shy person.
Now, you mentioned that as well in another interview, that sort of you didn't actually take up singing or like singing at all really until your late teens.
Yeah.
But you're a really good singer. That's kind of what fascinates me about that. Talk a little bit about that process of working into like from not singing that much to like working into like a really good voice.
I think some stuff kind of came naturally to me with singing, like lower range and middle range stuff was okay, but I just was way too shy to sing in front of everyone back in school. And it wasn't like I was singing in private either. I just did not really sing till I was probably like 16 or 17, like at all. I was not no one in my school, even up to year 12 when I was playing guitar in class, would have even known I had any interest in being a singer or I was a singer at all. Like I never sung in class ever. I was just always the guitarist guy. But trying to find singers for your bands back then, or anyone who could sing like I was really into power metal at the time. So any guys, there's no one I knew who could sing any like high notes or anything like that. So I just progressively just kept trying to learn how to sing myself. I made some good progress in those early days, like just pretty much trying to scream along to different recordings. But I'm still always going to be limited a little bit by having my lower voice, but I do what I can with it, and I'm pretty happy with my vocal abilities nowadays. Like it's a lot better than what I could do back in the day, and I can usually write what I want to write with my ability. So, but definitely just came more from driving around in my car when I was working at Pizza Hut. That was a lot of chance for me to practice singing. And probably my biggest jumps forward probably happened in that 17 to 20 age group. But I think based on the fact that I wasn't always a natural singer from a young age, like each album that we do, I kind of get a bit better with my skills. It's just a bit more refined each time, which is kind of good. A lot of times you get people who were amazing when they were 18 and it's just a gradual decline until they get older and then they can't really sing at all by 60. So hopefully if I keep picking up on this trajectory, I'll still have a decent voice when I'm an old bloke.
This may be a very difficult question. I've just come up with it. So you talked a little bit about other music you listen to besides sort of prog and metal. I'm wondering if you have any recommendations from other genres besides prog and metal, like a band or an artist or an album or anything like that.
Sure. Okay. Let me just think. So if people are into like modern hip hop stuff at all, I think like Denzel Curry is probably the best thing going in that kind of genre at the moment. So any of his last few releases you could check out and you would get a cool kind of exposure there. Vocals wise, in terms of harmonies and some of the vocal flourishes, any of the early kind of New Jack Swing or 90s like R&B albums, especially Jodeci, they're a really big influence on me with some of those like choral writing and vocal harmonies and runs and that kind of stuff. Diary of a Mad Band, that's probably a really good album to check out. There's some cringe-worthy ones that other people out there will die. I mean, I really love the Backstreet Boys album Millennium, which came out in the kind of junction between me being in primary school and high school, so it's got a big nostalgic spot for me with that. There's heaps and heaps of different stuff I like. And also, I guess another really big one with the vocal writing. I'm into, I guess, a lot of choral work as well. So, I'm trying to think like who would be a great. Eric Whitacre would probably be the go-to choral kind of composer that would be good to listen to. So, if there's a record called Light and Gold, where it's just like a best of all the stuff Eric Whitacre has done. I think that's like very haunting, amazing music to listen to.
And final question, what have you been listening to, reading, watching, or playing lately?
Okay, I'm trying to think about the band that's probably excited me the most lately is Sleep Token. There's an album called Sundowning, and they kind of blend a lot of that modern sort of pop vocals as well with like 8-string gent stuff and a lot of ethereal synth work. They're very mysterious, like you don't know anything about the band at all. They're run by a guy called Vessel, and you have no idea who his identity is. I think no one knows who he is. He might be a famous English singer, or it's very mysterious. So I find that really cool. Obviously, some other really good bands to listen to. Dirty Loops, they've had some new good songs recently. They're kind of like a jazz pop kind of fusion band. And locally, we have a lot of really good bands too, right? Like Seahorse, Voyager. And last year's Leprous album was sick as well. That's probably something worth checking out. But number one, Sleep Token, check that band out. They're awesome.
nothing left to show but division. Of time or die.
That was We Will, and the track you heard in the middle of the interview was What's the Catch. Thank you again to Doug from Hemina for chatting to me 2 months ago. Again, I apologise for the amount of time it's taken to get this interview out there. Before I leave you, I want to give you a couple of recommendations for stuff to listen to while you're, we're varying degrees of social distancing, but as we're coming out and we're still sort of trying to keep a little bit to ourselves. First one is a band called Master Massive, and their album Black Feathers on Their Graces. And it's kind of this... these are some of the bands who do this stuff really well. They take stuff like 70s prog and incorporate it into something that feels very sort of modern and fresh in a way. It doesn't feel kind of stodgy. It doesn't feel like they're sort of retreading and just emulating the people who they've inspired by. It's a really nice journey. It's got these classic guitar tones. I think you've got a mellotron in there. A really 70s feel. It's composed of 2 longer tracks. I think it's 15 minutes and 18 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. And then a 3-minute track, nice little sting in the tail. So the first track, I think if it was any longer, it could become close to sort of wearing out its welcome. But I think it does well to sort of dynamically and creatively sort of get you through that length. But if you're not a fan of long songs, maybe this isn't the one for you. Also, I recommend Bloodletting by Mountaineer. It's, I think, bands to compare it to, although they're not quite accurate, would be Deftones. They've got that really chunky sound to their guitars and those kind of slightly processed, slightly ethereal vocals sort of going through it, going over the top of it. Meaty sounds combined with a really nice clean voice. And someone also does remind me of Jesu, that kind of drony shoegaze approach. So really this band it's like you've got a sort of slightly post-rock shoegaze band and they made a really chunky doom metal record, which has that kind of repetitive feel that you might find in post-rock or shoegaze. I think the real thing that really makes it, as I've been mentioning, is the heavy doom element of it. It sort of comes through and sort of washes over you, and I think that really is not necessarily key to all doom metal records, but in this case, I think it really, really, really makes the album work. So check those both out, Bloodletting by Mountaineer and Black Feathers on Their Graces by Master Massive. You can check me out on social media at AusHunger, that's AUS Hunger on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, and you can also send me an email, australianhunger@gmail.com, any comments, questions, or if you're a band you want to set up an interview, maybe we can get something sorted out. But until next week, stay safe, and I will catch you then.